At 1:06 a.m. on November 13, 1942, Commander Ernest Evans stood on the bridge of the destroyer USS Johnston, watching the silhouettes of 8 Japanese warships emerge from the darkness in Iron Bottom Sound, just north of Guadalcanal. The enemy force included the battleship High, displacing 36,000 tons and armed with 14 14-inch guns. The Johnston displaced 2,100 tons and carried 5 5-inch guns. The odds were mathematically absurd. In a conventional naval engagement, a destroyer had a 3% chance of surviving against a battleship. The standard doctrine was clear: destroyers should launch torpedoes from maximum range, create smoke, and retreat. But Commander Evans had received different orders 3 weeks earlier, orders that the Navy Department had tried to suppress, orders that a Navy tribunal would later call reckless endangerment of government property. The orders were simple: if conventional tactics fail, ram the enemy. The concept violated every principle of naval warfare. A destroyer ramming a cruiser was like a motorcycle attacking a tank. The destroyer would be obliterated, the crew killed, and the enemy ship would likely survive with minor damage. But what happened in the next 90 minutes would prove that sometimes the mathematically impossible becomes strategically essential. The story begins 6 weeks earlier, in October 1942, when Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan took command of Task Force 67. The situation in the Pacific was desperate. Japan controlled the Solomon Islands and was reinforcing Guadalcanal every night with the Tokyo Express, fast convoys that American forces couldn't intercept. The U.S. Navy was losing the war of attrition. Callahan was a surface warfare specialist who had studied every naval battle since Jutland. He concluded that American destroyers were being wasted. They would fire torpedoes from 10,000 yards, miss 80% of the time, and retreat. The Japanese, meanwhile, had perfected the long lance torpedo, which could hit targets at 20,000 yards with devastating accuracy. The Americans were fighting a losing game with outdated tactics. Callahan's solution was radical: close-range engagement. American destroyers would charge directly at Japanese ships, breaking through their formations and forcing them into chaotic melee combat where superior Japanese optics and night fighting techniques became useless. The final option, if all weapons failed, was ramming. The Navy Department reviewed Callahan's proposal and rejected it immediately. The official response stated, "Ramming tactics are not authorized under any circumstances. Destroyers are valuable assets and cannot be sacrificed in kamikaze-style attacks." But Callahan had powerful allies. Admiral William Halsey, commander of the South Pacific, personally endorsed the plan. Halsey wrote, "We're losing this war with caution. I'd rather lose ships trying to win than lose ships trying not to lose." On October 29, Callahan issued Tactical Memorandum 5-42 to all destroyer commanders in Task Force 67. The document was classified top secret and marked Command Eyes Only. It outlined a new doctrine: aggressive close-range engagement with ramming authorized as a last resort. Commander Evans of the Johnston received his copy on November 1 and immediately began drilling his crew in high-speed maneuvering and collision preparation. Evans was a Cherokee from Oklahoma, one of the first Native Americans to command a destroyer. He was 36 years old, hard-faced, and known for aggressive tactics. When he assumed command of the Johnston in 1941, he told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to come along had better get off right now." Nobody left. On November 12, 1942, American intelligence detected a major Japanese force heading toward Guadalcanal. The enemy convoy included 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 14 destroyers, carrying 13,000 troops and heavy artillery to crush the American garrison. Callahan's Task Force 67 moved to intercept with 5 cruisers and 8 destroyers. The American ships were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one advantage: surprise and audacity. At 1:24 a.m. on November 13, radar detected the Japanese fleet at 27,000 yards. Callahan ordered, "Odd destroyers attack to port, even destroyers attack to starboard. All ships stand by for close-range action." The Johnston was designated Destroyer 1, attacking to port. Evans ordered full speed, 35 knots, directly toward the Japanese battleship Hai. The crew had 12 minutes to prepare for impact. At 1:48 a.m., the Japanese opened fire. The night exploded in muzzle flashes and searchlight beams. The destroyer USS Cushing was hit by a 14-inch shell and disintegrated. The cruiser USS Atlanta was struck by 19 shells in 4 minutes and set ablaze. The battle became a chaotic knife fight at ranges under 3,000 yards, exactly as Callahan had planned. But the American ships were being torn apart. The Johnston charged through the inferno. Evans maneuvered at maximum speed, weaving between shell splashes and torpedo wakes. At 1:52 a.m., the Johnston fired all 10 torpedoes at the Hai from 3,000 yards. One torpedo struck the battleship's bow, damaging the steering mechanism. But the Hai's secondary batteries opened fire, and the Johnston was hit by 3 6-inch shells. The forward gun mount was destroyed, killing 12 men instantly. Evans was wounded by shrapnel in his left hand and neck, but remained on the bridge. Damage reports flooded in: fire in the forward magazine, steering control damaged, speed reduced to 17 knots. The Johnston was crippled and surrounded by enemy ships. Conventional tactics would call for retreat. Evans ordered the opposite. He turned the Johnston directly toward the Japanese heavy cruiser Kinagasa, 4,000 yards to starboard. The executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Robert Hagan, protested, "Skipper, we're dead in the water if we close further. We should withdraw and regroup." Evans replied, "We're already dead. The question is whether we die running or die fighting." Ramming speed. The Johnston's engines, damaged but functional, pushed the destroyer to 20 knots. The crew braced for impact. Evans calculated the angle of attack: strike the cruiser amidships, just aft of the forward turret, where the armor was thinnest. At 1:58 a.m., the Johnston was 800 yards from the Kinagasa when the cruiser's searchlights locked onto the American destroyer. The Kinagasa fired every weapon that could bear: 8-inch guns, 5-inch secondary batteries, machine guns. The Johnston's superstructure was shredded. The aft gun mounts were knocked out. Fires raged across the deck. But the ship kept coming. At 2:01 a.m., at a speed of 18 knots, the Johnston struck the Kinagasa on the starboard side, just behind the forward turret. The impact was catastrophic. The Johnston's bow crumpled like aluminum foil, penetrating 15 feet into the cruiser's hull. The collision opened a 40-foot gash below the Kinagasa's waterline, flooding 3 compartments instantly. But the ramming also crushed the Johnston's forward third. The destroyer's bow broke off entirely, and seawater flooded the forward spaces. 37 men were killed in the collision. The Johnston drifted away, its bow gone, burning from stem to stern. But the Kinagasa was doomed. The flooding couldn't be contained, and the cruiser began listing to starboard. At 2:47 a.m., the Kinagasa capsized and sank, taking 511 men with it. The Johnston, incredibly, remained afloat. Evans ordered the crew to abandon ship, but before they could, the destroyer USS Sterett appeared and fired 4 torpedoes at the crippled battleship Hai, which had been circling the area. 2 torpedoes hit, and the Hai, already damaged by the Johnston's earlier attack, began taking on water. At 3:12 a.m., the Japanese force withdrew. They had lost the battleship Hai, which would sink later that morning, and the cruiser Kinagasa, which the Johnston had destroyed. The American force was shattered, but the Japanese troop convoy turned back, never reaching Guadalcanal. The garrison was saved. The Johnston sank at 4:30 a.m. Evans and 185 men survived, rescued by American PT boats. The Battle of Guadalcanal was the turning point in the Pacific War. Admiral Halsey called it the fiercest naval battle ever fought. But the Navy Department was furious about the ramming tactics. A formal inquiry was convened in December 1942 to investigate Commander Evans and Admiral Callahan. The charge was clear: reckless endangerment of naval assets and violation of standing orders prohibiting ramming attacks. The inquiry took testimony from 47 survivors and reviewed the tactical memorandums. The prosecution argued that Evans had needlessly destroyed his ship when he could have withdrawn. The defense, led by Admiral Halsey himself, argued that the Johnston's ramming attack had been the decisive action of the battle, crippling the Kinagasa and forcing the Japanese to withdraw. The tribunal deliberated for 6 days. On January 8, 1943, the tribunal issued its verdict. Commander Evans was clear of all charges. The ruling stated, in the context of the tactical situation, Commander Evans' actions were consistent with the aggressive spirit necessary for victory. While ramming tactics remain unauthorized except in extremis, this case qualifies as extremis. More significantly, the tribunal recommended that Tactical Memorandum 5-42 be incorporated into standard destroyer doctrine. The Navy Department rejected the recommendation. Ramming orders were permanently banned in February 1943. Admiral Callahan, who had conceived the tactic, had been killed during the battle when his flagship, the cruiser USS San Francisco, was hit by 45 shells. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Commander Evans received the Navy Cross and was promoted to captain. He would command 3 more destroyers during the war, surviving every engagement. But the legacy of the Johnston's ramming attack lived on in an unexpected way. Japanese naval intelligence analyzed the wreckage of the Kinagasa and concluded that American destroyers were now willing to ram enemy ships in suicide attacks, similar to kamikaze tactics. A Japanese naval intelligence report from March 1943 stated, American destroyer doctrine has shifted to aggressive close-range engagement including intentional ramming. All units must maintain maximum separation from enemy destroyers. This perception changed Japanese tactical planning. Throughout 1943 and 1944, Japanese commanders maintained greater distances from American destroyers, reducing their effectiveness in night battles. The fear of ramming attacks, whether real or imagined, caused the Japanese to adopt more cautious tactics precisely when aggression was needed. The psychological impact of one destroyer's suicidal charge rippled through the entire Imperial Navy. In October 1944, Commander Evans, now Captain Evans, took command of a new destroyer, also named USS Johnston. During the battle off Samar on October 25, 1944, Evans once again charged a superior Japanese force, this time consisting of 4 battleships and 6 cruisers. The Johnston attacked alone, firing every torpedo and shell before being sunk by concentrated fire. Evans went down with his ship and was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The wreck of the original Johnston, the destroyer that rammed the Kinagasa, was discovered in 2019 at a depth of 4,200 meters in Iron Bottom Sound. The bow section, sheared off during the ramming attack, was found 300 meters from the main wreck. Naval archaeologists confirmed that the collision had penetrated the cruiser's hull with such force that fragments of the Johnston's steel were still embedded in the Kinagasa's wreckage. The ramming orders that the Navy tried to ban had proven that sometimes the most illogical tactic becomes the most effective. The Johnston, a tiny destroyer, had shattered a heavy cruiser through sheer audacity and changed the course of the battle. As Admiral Halsey wrote in his memoir, the Johnston didn't just sink a cruiser. It sank the Japanese belief that we would fight by their rules. And that made all the difference.